Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
There are, across the country, more than 430 units of the national park system. And, no doubt, most of us are only familiar with the so-called name brand parks. Places like Shenandoah, Acadia, Everglades, Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon. But just because you're not already familiar with a park unit doesn't mean you should write it off your to-do list. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. While I am familiar with the names of most park units due to my day job, I haven't had the chance to visit them all, just yet. Being a lover of water and paddling, when I consider where to go for a break from the keyboard, I often have a requirement that water is required. And while I haven't been there yet, I am intrigued by St. Croix National Scenic Riverway in Wisconsin and Minnesota and its two rivers. Today, I'm going to learn a little bit more about this interesting park and share with you my conversation with Nate Toering, the park's Director of Communications and Education. We'll be back in a minute with Nate.
Smokey's Life, full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It is also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference too at friendsofacadia.org.
Welcome to the Traveler, Nate.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kurt.
Hey, I appreciate you making the time. And before we get started, help me with the pronunciation of the rivers, those two rivers names. I think I've got the St. Croix figured out, but how do you pronounce that other one?
It is the Namakagon.
Namakagon. Where does that herald from? What's it mean?
Yeah, so the meaning of the Namakagon is Ojibwe in its nature, and it means the place of the sturgeon.
The place of the sturgeon. We're going to get into sturgeon as we go on down through our conversation. But I'm kind of curious, what can you tell us about the park in general? I mean, if you were talking to a buddy across the country who had never been there, how would you describe it to him?
Yeah, that's a great question. So St. Croix National Scenic Riverway is about 230 miles of river. As you mentioned, the two rivers there, the Namakagon and the St. Croix River. The St. Croix is a good portion of the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and the Namakagon is about just under 100 miles of it that's operated by the National Park Service. Together, those two form just a fantastic gem of a wild and scenic river, providing opportunities for recreation and enjoyment. And I think probably the best part about it is that it's in rather close proximity to a major metropolitan area, with St. Paul and Minneapolis being a short drive away.
Yeah, that is pretty unusual. How did it come to be? I mean, two different rivers, they do connect down the road, so to speak, but it seems a little bit unusual to have a park with two rivers in two different states.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of unusual things with this particular national park site. But yeah, in 1968, Congress actually established the Riverway as one of the 8 original rivers protected under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Ultimately, about 4 years later, in 1972, the Lower St. Croix was also added into the system. So that gets you that total of 230 miles of protected river, and the final 25 miles of the river is not technically part of the national park, but is still part of the Wild and Scenic River System, and is protected and preserved by the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Now, wild and scenic, I'm not sure too many people would associate rivers near Minneapolis as wild and scenic. Maybe more in Alaska or in the West where there's not as many people, but they really carry that feeling of being in a wild wilderness area?
100%. And that's really, I think, what makes these so special. You're totally spot on that you wouldn't think that you would be able to get that experience so close to a major city, but you really can. And that is in part due to that long-standing protection, right? So one of the first original 8 protected under the Act, and also just a lot of judicious efforts over the years to maintain that scenic allure. This particular national park site has a lot of scenic easements, and that is one of the ways that we help maintain that visual perspective as you're paddling down the river or however you're enjoying the river, that quite often you can do that without necessarily seeing any intrusions of modern society, right? So those are few and far between that you're going to see something on the riverbanks. And often when you do, it's in just one kind of consolidated area. So perhaps where a bridge crosses the river, we've also put a landing in that area. So when you do see those little blips of civilization, they're generally few and far between.
Now, it's called a National Scenic Riverway, but at the same time, you've got some land-based recreational opportunities, some pretty decent hiking, and in the wintertime, I think skiing, cross-country skiing.
Yep, totally. The experience that you have here will obviously be dictated by the weather and the time that you're here. So as far as the hiking, there are I believe 7 trails maintained directly by the National Park Service, but as mentioned, there's a lot of interesting sort of jurisdictional overlaps here. So while we only maintain a handful of hiking trails, there's a lot of what I'll call sort of community partners. So state parks and national forests, state forests, that kind of thing that dot along these 2 riverways and also provide additional hiking trails maintained by those sites. There's a lot of opportunity to experience, hiking and some of those things on land, either in close proximity to or right on the edge of the river. As far as winter activities, all kinds of stuff. We do programming involving things like learn how to ice fish, right? We do have folks out here cross country skiing. We do snowshoeing, all kinds of stuff. So you really can have a kind of a full gambit of experiences. It just sort of depends on what you're looking for and what time of year you're looking to take that trip.
It's the third week of December. Has winter started to show up there yet?
Yeah, it's a little chilly. I would say the last 2 days it was hovering right around 0, if not a little bit below 0. But we've had a bit of a warm streak. So I think the last time I looked, it was 18 degrees outside. So winter is certainly upon us. A little bit of snow on the ground, maybe an inch of snow or so on the ground. But I think we're expecting a little bit more next week.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that white stuff. I'm in Utah, Park City, the ski capital of the United States, and we're kind of starved for snow. Although we did get a few inches this morning. Now you've got more than 200 miles of river, and you've got obviously land-based recreation. How many staff do you have to manage that to patrol? Do you have active patrols on the river during the season?
Yeah, we do. So it depends on, just like every national park, we swell during the peak season, right? So we bring on seasonal staff to support all kinds of things. We have an active communications and education team, which I'm part of. So, a team of 4 or 5 folks will bring on 6 seasonal staff in the summer months, as well as interns and all kinds of things to support it. But yeah, they are, all divisions are really working together to accomplish the mission. So when you talk about patrolling the river, the thing I wonder if you're speaking about is, the law enforcement end of that, right? The resource visitor protection end. And we do have, visitor and resource protection rangers who do river patrols, patrol the landings as well. So by landings, I'm talking about the river access points and a robust team of folks that work on our land. So as I mentioned, a lot of scenic easements and a lot of that overlapping jurisdictional areas. So we bring on folks to help kind of navigate the complexities of a park that just has so many different partners overlapping with us.
Now, we've talked a little bit that it's not a name brand park when you look across the national park system, but it's not exactly a undiscovered gem either. I mean, in 2023, you had more than 800,000 visitors. And I don't know how 24 has gone, but you're not too far from a million. That's not bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on. I think it was right around 810,000 in 2023. And if I had to guess, we'll be over 900,000 this year, but obviously still a guess. There's a little bit of time to go. With some national parks, tracking visitation is really easy. Some other parks, it can be complex. We're, on the end of complexities, but yeah, it's a well used park. I think well loved both by local folks who, for them it's going and sort of enjoying the river in their backyard, so to say, and folks coming from all over the country to enjoy it. The benefit of having a park that is spread out over a pretty large geographic area is it allows some variety for folks depending on what kind of experience they're having. Typically, just as a broad explanation, the closer you get to those metropolitan areas, typically you see more people. So as you start to stretch further north and east, it tends to be a more quiet experience that you're going to have.
Now, of those 800 or 900,000 visitors, do you have a sense for where they're coming from? Are they mostly, local Wisconsin, Minnesota residents, or somebody from Utah driving out with his canoe to spend a week on the river?
Well, I mean, anecdotally, it's both, right? Unfortunately, we don't have the greatest of data on that. A lot of what we're doing is trying to track metrics from things like how busy landings are, right? How many vehicles are going into them, things like that. But we don't have, at least not that I'm aware of, detailed metrics of what percentage are coming from out of town. But anecdotally, if you walk around some of these parking lots, you will certainly see plenty of license plates from, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, stuff within that kind of closer driving range. I've also seen ones from all over the country, right? So people do make the trek out here to have that wild river experience, and in some situations to be able to maybe get away from some of the bigger city life in the areas that they're departing from.
Now, you keep mentioning that wild river experience. As I mentioned in the introduction, I love to paddle. I've got about, oh my gosh, 55 years or so of paddling experience. Describe the two rivers and what do you think would fit best for what I'm looking for?
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question. There, there's definitely a different level of experience that you're going to get with each. I will say just a shout out to our park website has a pretty good breakdown to help people make that decision. So everything from I've never done any paddling on my own, all the way up to I want to maybe get into some mild rapids and have a more, solo experience. And I think that's really kind of what it comes down to. How long are you trying to spend on the water? What kind of experience do you want to have? And then you can really plan it out from there. The Namakagon, generally speaking, is going to be more of that wild experience, less likely to see folks as you're out there. With the few exceptions, right? Just like anything, there's some pockets of activity on the Namakagon, particularly around Trigo or Hayward, some of these population centers. You could expect to see more people, but generally speaking, the Namakagon is going to be a quieter, more of a almost like a backcountry experience. That's not an exact way of saying it, but that could be a good comparison for somebody who's maybe experienced with backpacking or something like that. It's you're going to be more kind of out in the wild. Versus as you get onto the St. Croix, the northern portion of the St. Croix is sort of, also remains quiet, similar to the Namakagon. But as you start to travel south, you get a little bit more of that sort of build up a population. You're more likely to start seeing folks down there. Perhaps the amenities might be a little bit more accessible, right? So you're just going to have things as you get down closer to the cities. You may see something like Osceola Landing, right? That has flush toilets and ample parking and paved roads, right? Versus on the far end of the Namakagon, you might be pulling into a landing that's just kind of a gravel strip and there's a little spot to slide your kayak into the water, right? So the experience differs pretty drastically depending on where you are.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about overnight trips, I mean, what would be the average overnight trip? 2 or 3 days?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on the individual. I think that's pretty standard. A day or two, the average person is going to do something like that. But there definitely is the ability for folks that want to spend a little bit more time out there to do that. You could make multi-day trips. You probably could even make multi-week trip if you really wanted to. So we have just over about 150 campsites that are maintained by the National Park Service, spread throughout the Riverway, and those afford opportunities for folks to stay for up to 3 days at each site. I think most folks generally will stop by, spend the night, and then paddle out to their next destination. But if you really wanted to make an extended trip out of it, you certainly could.
What about wildlife? What are you going to encounter as you're paddling your way down the rivers?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. River otters, all kinds of birds, deer, fish, plenty of stuff. It all depends on kind of where you are and when you're out, right? Obviously, if you're out near the riverway this time of year, you might be seeing some different things than if you're out there in the middle of July. But an abundance of it, and sort of following that same trend, you're more likely to see more of it the further you. Get away from those sort of pockets of civilization. As you get a little more isolated, you start to see a lot more wildlife that's calling this place home.
Any black bear or bobcats?
Yeah, we do. I'm not sure about bobcats, not that I've heard of, not saying that they're not there, but we definitely have, have had black bear in the areas around the river. Again, same thing. More of it as you get up into the Namakagon, and kind of just like any wildlife, the further you get away from civilization, the more likely are you to see wildlife. But yeah, definitely black bear.
All your rivers are kind of dependent on precipitation for their water flow. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, all of the water has to get there some way, and for us, that's snow and rainfall.
So I imagine that kind of defines the best season to put in.
Sure, the water levels can fluctuate, but you're spot on, and that's the experience that you're going to have on the river is going to depend on what those water levels are, right? So if you have higher than normal water levels, you might see higher water flow. You might see perhaps rapids that normally were class one might become class two, that kind of thing. And on the inverse, paddling when the water is really low, you can also have some impacts from that, right? So areas that normally are a little easier to travel over, you might have rocks bumping the bottom of your kayak. Ask me how I know. That was one of my first experiences here at St. Croix. The water levels were just a bit lower, and I was doing, I'm sure if you've got a tremendous amount of paddling experience, you've had to shuffle your way along some rocks before. So it's highly dependent on the water levels, and with that, I think it's important to do sort of that proper due diligence and in anticipation of a trip out here, whether it's doing your own research or just giving us a call and talking to a park ranger and determining what the current conditions are, and perhaps where is better to go vice somewhere else.
But does it fluctuate through spring, summer, and fall? I mean, I would think that spring might be the best time and fall the worst time. But then, if it's dependent on rainfall, maybe you guys get a rainy summer and it's pretty good.
Yeah, sure. So in the spring, and I've only been here since June, but my understanding is in the spring, as you start to have all of that snow melt, I say all of that snow because that's depending on how much snow you actually have. But if you have a good amount of snow, as the snow melts, that obviously is adding to the water table. And yeah, just like you mentioned, I think it's highly dependent on weather patterns, right? If you have a substantial amount of rainfall, that's going to send you in one direction. If you're in, drought or near drought conditions, that'll obviously send you in another direction. So it's at the whim of Mother Nature, as is many things in this line of work.
This is Kurt Rapinchuk with the National Parks Traveler. We're talking today with Nate Toering, the Director of Communications and Education for the St. Croix National Riverway in Wisconsin and Minnesota. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. You can show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org.
Hi, Kurt Rapinchuk, founder and editor-in-chief of the National Parks Traveler. I hope today's podcast about the challenges the National Park Service and the National Park System are facing is of interest to you in helping you appreciate what the Park Service and the national parks are up against. At The Traveler, our role is to bring these stories, along with stories of exploration, scientific discovery, and cultural history, to your attention. After all, these lands belong to you, the American taxpayers, and you should know how they're being cared for. If you appreciate this coverage and find it critical, I hope you'll support The Traveler with a donation. We're in the middle of the annual Newsmatch campaign to raise charitable dollars for nonprofit media organizations, and we really could use your support so we're able to continue producing these stories for your benefit. Please view the donate page on the Traveler website and contribute what you can to our nonprofit news organization. After all, It's essential coverage for essential places. So Nate, I did spend a little time on your website. It's one of the better websites I've encountered in terms of ease of use and information that's available there. You mentioned 150 campsites, and some have more amenities than others, or?
Yeah, certainly. It depends on where you're going. Generally speaking, you're going to have kind of the utmost basics. A spot to pull off and camp. And so all of these campsites that I'm talking about are essentially what I would refer to as primitive shoreline campsites. So this is the basics. Oftentimes they'll be like a fire ring, something like that. But we're talking pack in, pack out, right? Leave no trace principles. They're first come, first serve. Currently, they're fee free, meaning that you don't have to reserve it or pay for us. There is a registration system for a portion of the Riverway on the far southern end. Without getting too complex, I would say just visit the website. But yeah, we have it broken down into 10 sections, each of those sections having campsites within it and maps identifying each site. But pretty much as you're paddling down the river as it stands right now, you're looking for a brown sign with a tent on it, and that generally is your only indication that there's a campsite there. If you see that and nobody else has already camped there, that's a location that you can pull out and spend the night at.
Yeah, those signs are dead giveaways, although sometimes they get faded. I think a bright orange one might be better. Now, a lot of your campsites, as you mentioned, you paddle up to them. There's no road access. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I will say if car camping is your thing, we have, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these sort of local partners. So nearby state parks, forests, wildlife areas, all kinds of stuff. So folks who are looking for that car camping experience, you can actually have it in many cases in very close proximity to the river. So the example right down the road from our headquarters facility here in St. Croix Falls is the Wisconsin Interstate Park, right, which offers pull-in camping right adjacent to the river, just to help meet those needs of folks that are looking to do car camping. But you could absolutely walk right down to the river and get the National Riverway right in front of you.
I noticed on the website it mentioned something about camping zones. What's that all about?
Yeah, so depends on which section of the website you're looking at, and I think we'll probably talk about this here in a little bit, but there's two things going on here, and this is where it gets kind of complex. So we have zones broken up into essentially maps, right, of these different areas in camping. When you're covering 230 miles of river, you can't exactly stick every single campsite on one map and have it make any sense, right? So we broke it down into these easily digestible 10 different zones that identify campsites. They identify things like rapids, landings, right? All of the key things that you'd want to know if you were traveling around that section of the river. On the other end, as far as long-term planning, there's some discussions related to that. So I'm not sure if you were discussing that or just sort of the existing zones.
No, the existing zones. I was kind of curious.
Yep.
Now, as you mentioned, and as I saw when I was surfing around your website, you do have maps on there. Is there a hardbound copy of maps to the rivers that people can buy?
Yeah, so the stuff that's available on the website, there's a couple things. There's those 10 section maps that I mentioned. We also have the standard park brochure, the Unigrid, as it's called, the black banner brochure. The inside of that has a full park map, but those 10 supplementary zone maps really help us kind of hone in on the details of it. All of those are available for free at our park visitor centers. So we have one at St. Croix Falls in Wisconsin. We have another for the Namakogan River up in Trego, Wisconsin, and any visitor who wanted to could walk in and get those maps. We also, at the various landings spread throughout the park, over 40 landings, we generally have a section map of that particular section will be in kind of a little drop box on a bulletin board there. And often there's other site-specific information that may be posted in that bulletin board that would be relevant to somebody who was going to paddle that particular area.
Just wondering, I'm old school and I like to have something in my hands to look at and mark up and whatnot. Are there pretty good digital maps that people can download onto a phone or even an iPad if they want to take that on the river?
Yeah, you certainly could. Those maps that I've been talking about, those are available online in digital format. Definitely encourage the duplicity. I also am an old school one. Like even if I know I have a great map on my phone, I've also dropped plenty of phones in the water, and it doesn't work very well after you do that. So yeah, those are available online. Our maps are on the park website, mps.gov/SACN. You can get copies of those maps there, and help plan your trip that way. But absolutely, I would go with what you're saying and have a paper copy, if nothing else, as a backup.
Now, you mentioned fishing, and I saw on your website that there are some sections of one or both of the rivers that have trout. I think was it brown trout or brook trout?
It's a great question. I'm going to be honest, Kurt. I'm not much of a fisherman, so this is not my particular area of expertise. I will say there is abundant fishing throughout the Riverway. That's again sort of anecdotally, both my colleagues in the National Park Service, doing programs in the park. It's something that I think is fantastic. Which is we have these sort of fish with a ranger, learn how to fish programs going on both in the river itself and in what I will call like the larger watershed. So this sort of larger area with tributary rivers and streams that ultimately feed into these rivers. Fishing is abundant here. I'm not much of an angler myself.
It sounds like something you might want to brush up on now that you're there.
Yeah, I know. It's on my very, very long to-do list.
Yeah. What about sturgeon? I mean, if the Namakagon River, if I pronounce that right, is Ojibwe word for sturgeon. There must be sturgeon in the river, and if there's sturgeon, people must be interested in fishing for them.
Yeah, certainly. And it is something I know folks are go to great lengths to come out and do fishing trips here. We have sort of outfitters, these commercial services who focus specifically on that, whether it be guide services or specifically just outfitters equipping folks with it. But yes, I know folks are out there looking for sturgeon among many other things if they're here for angling.
Now, once upon a time, probably more in the last century than this century, I'd love to backpack. As one gets older, the bones and don't always like it as much as they used to. That's why I paddle so much. But I noticed on your website a very curious description about your hiking opportunities, and it said, start a 1,000-mile journey across Wisconsin. What's
Yeah,
that all
yeah.
about?
Well, there are some connecting trails, part of some really large systems, right adjacent to the Riverway. One of them, so I just mentioned the Wisconsin Interstate Park has a visitor center specifically geared towards this, but the Ice Age National Scenic Trail is one of these larger trail systems, as well as the North Country National Scenic Trail. So you can really, through combining of these federally and in some cases locally managed trails, you really could do an extensive trip if you wanted to, connecting trails from one side of the state to the other.
That does sound like a great opportunity. Do you know if many people do that?
As far as hiking the whole thing, I couldn't tell you. I'm sure there are some folks adventurous enough to do that. What I will say is there's plenty of people, myself included, who are doing it in bits and pieces. So I've been out on
Sure.
sections of the Ice Age Trail, and I'm starting to get right there with you, Kurt, in terms of I don't know if I can do 1,000 miles of backpacking, but it provides opportunities if you just want to go out and do little day hikes, but still be on these very historically significant trails. You can do it piece by piece.
Yeah, and I think that's something that more and more people are starting to pay attention to or become aware of. Usually when you talk about long distance hikes, you're talking about the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail. If you're really into bushwhacking, the Continental Divide Trail. But the Ice Age Trail, the North Country Trail, they're getting longer and longer as folks in Congress realize that there's a demand for it, and there's some great history and geography and geology that you can hike through.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a fantastic opportunity both for the outdoor recreational aspect, but as you mentioned, just there's a lot to be learned, right? The Ice Age Trail, just fantastic information about the ice age itself, but geology, glacial features, all kinds of things like that, which were totally new to me. And I've been out on some of those other trails. I've been on the Appalachian Trail, never one point to another, but sections of it at a time. And I think the ones here are fantastic, just as the Appalachian is.
Yeah, yeah, we've had some stories on the Ice Age Trail, but not too many on the North Country Trail. I think I might just have to assign myself a trip out to your end of the world to get up close and personal with it.
Sure, sounds like a plan. Let us know if we can help.
Absolutely. With 230 miles of river and hiking trails, do you have many search and rescue operations in the park? Annual
Sure, just
basis?
like any national park site, they do happen. I will say they thankfully are fairly few and far between. For us as a riverway, obviously river safety is something that's very important. That's kind of what I wanted to stress earlier with that sort of little messaging about planning for the conditions, right? So for us, that's kind of the number one concern is just related to the river itself. But I think thankfully ours are fairly few and far between. And even though the geography is really very spread out, it's also not super complex in terms of the places that somebody could go, right? For us on the river, it's you're either on the river or you're on the river banks, which would, does make those kinds of situations a little more palatable by somebody who just had, thousands of square miles of wilderness, right? So it does make the being able to address those situations less frequently, and it's a little simpler than if you were out in the absolute middle of nowhere.
Is climate change having impacts on the National Riverway there? Be it extending the shoulder seasons and leading to more people, or hotter temperatures in the summertime?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the data in front of me. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anywhere in the world that doesn't have some impact from climate change. Definitely a different situation here than previous parks I worked at. Working at a national seashore, right? Sea level rise is something that's apparent and in your face, and a little hard to not notice. I think here some of the things are a little more indirect, which can make it more difficult to know what's what and what's causing what. I think for us, we are recently designated as a climate friendly park. So as a park unit, we are doing what we can to be more climate friendly, building out infrastructure in ways that are resilient to climate change, adopting things like utilizing EVs and hybrid vehicles as our park fleet, trying to work on public education to just engage folks on it. So as far as the impacts, I don't have any concrete data, but we're trying to do our part to make sure that what does happen is mitigated against.
Right, right. Talking about planning, recently you guys had some public sessions on work to update your comprehensive river management plan. What's that all about?
Yeah, it's a great question. This was kind of my hit the ground running experience to jump and get involved in our comprehensive river management plan. The comprehensive river management plan is essentially a planning document that will help bring forward our management philosophy and decision making process into the modern age, and really guide that decision making framework for the next 20 years or so. The previous documents that it's helping bring forward are a little over 25 years old. So two different ones, one from 1998, one from 2001. So we talked about visitation earlier. Back then, we had about a third of the visitation that we have now. So obviously, if nothing else, the amount of people coming into the park has changed substantially, and that's a major contributing factor to how we manage this place. So this helps us plan for and adapt to this kind of new environment that we're in, and will help future managers make decisions about what is or isn't appropriate to do on the riverway.
And what's the time frame for getting that accomplished, getting it finished?
Yeah, so it's been going on for over 18 months now. It's a pretty lengthy process. I would envision that the final document will probably be out by like late summer or fall of next year. So, it's mid-December right now. We're in an open comment window between now and the end of the year, so through December 31st. We are taking comments on where it's at now, which is basically proposals. We proposed a bunch of things. We'll take comments on those. We will review the comments, and then we're going to work on what is essentially a draft plan. Next year, we'll bring that draft plan out for another round of comments. Like, hey, we heard what you said. We took all of these comments in, and we've created this draft plan. Now we'd like to see what you think about the draft plan. And that'll be essentially the final round of public comments. The stuff that's going into this plan is based on other public comments, so feedback that we received during listening sessions. Not all, but some of it tied to exactly what I'm talking about. Potential changes to camping because folks were concerned that they were not able to find campsites as easily as they could before, right? So this is just tied to this increased use. We look at these things that folks mentioned they thought were problematic, and we try and find creative solutions to address those problems.
Is it something regarding the campsites where you can add more sites?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? And this is you're getting to the root of what we're asking in these public comments, right? So we have proposed two potential options, right? So we'll call them option A and option B. Option A is keep things more natural, so to say, limit development, right? So that's down the route of like maybe we don't make more campsites, right? Maybe we don't improve infrastructure at these landings. Vice option B is down the route of doing that, right? Of like, hey, maybe we invest a little bit more in infrastructure improvements. Maybe we have more of these landings that are set up to accommodate more people, and they have a distinct spot for the public to launch, and here's a spot for the outfitters to launch, right? These two options really kind of take the park in two different directions, and would be, to use an analogy, it's a fork in the river, right? Do you keep things about how they are and try and figure out other ways to handle this increased visitation, or do you change how things are, increase your infrastructure and your footprint to accommodate additional visitation? To the root of your question, when it comes to camping, like I said, folks are saying, hey, we're having trouble finding campsites. So one of the things that we have proposed in this, potential river management plan is to do a reservation system. So similar to a lot of other national park sites where you would go on recreation.gov, you would, put your reservation in for a campsite, and you would have that spot assigned, and we could then limit how many folks were camping. What we were proposing is more of a zonal registration system, meaning that you're not necessarily reserving campsite 121, you're reserving a site within zone number 4. And if you paddle into that zone, you can pick any site as long as you're in the zone. So this kind of is a middle ground for us. As I mentioned before, as it stands right now, you go get in your kayak, paddle down the river, you see that little brown sign with the tent on it, and you pull over and camp there. And that's really the end of it. This sort of proposed middle ground is not the full way of like, hey, you need to go to campsite 121. You just have to find something in this specific zone. So it still allows some of that same freedom for folks that want to go out and camp and not necessarily be burdened with I want to paddle for 2 more hours, but my site is here. They could still potentially keep paddling and just find another site within their zone. So it allows some flexibility, and we hope it's a middle ground that folks are comfortable with. But obviously it's a big change. With this comes the proposal to have a fee associated with camping, something that hasn't been in place before. From our end, with the increased visitation comes all the things that come with more people, heavier use of the campsites, shore bank being eroded from more people, pulling in and out of it, all kinds of things, increased visitor and resource protection concerns. So that additional fee that we're proposing would potentially allow us to mitigate some of those negative impacts from visitation to keep that high level visitor experience that we expect from our national parks.
And with that proposed zonal approach, I would imagine in theory that you wouldn't have more people on the river for that zone than campsites could handle.
Yep, absolutely something we accounted for. I don't have an exact number, and I think that's something that would come out with further discussion pending the public feedback, right? But the idea would be that it would be a number lower than the available campsites, right? So if let's just say there's 10 available campsites in this, perhaps we only issue 7 available camping permits, meaning that there will always be an available campsite for someone within that zone.
Yeah, yeah. Now, last week I was talking to one of your colleagues out in Point Reyes National Seashore, and we were talking about elephant seals, and she gave me some pretty interesting factoids and trivia about elephant seals. I'm not going to quiz you on them, but I will tell you that apparently elephant seals can dive a mile down in the ocean. Don't know if they have to do decompression stops on the way up or not, but what sort of trivia or factoids do you have there at St. Croix that people might not have realized or appreciated?
Gosh, that is such a good question. I don't know if I was prepared for that one. I think the first one is one that I've already said, right? Which is that in the last 25 years or so, our visitation has tripled. I find that, absolutely fascinating from a statistics standpoint. And I think the other one is what I started off with, which is really what made me so interested in taking this position here, which is you can have a near wilderness experience within an hour or so of a major airport, which is just something that in my line of work as a national park ranger is I have found difficult to find. It's usually one or the other. You're either smack in the city at a historic site or something like that, or you are out in the middle of nowhere. And this place really blends those two. So I don't know if that's a fun fact like elephant seals lung capacity, but I think it's two things that are fascinating about this particular place.
So, Nate, I mean, you come to the park and you paddle, and maybe you have a couple extra days, or you're just out for a weekend camping, spending a few days with your family hiking around. What sort of programs can the visitor take in during their stay?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. You certainly can have an experience, without engaging with park staff or any of us. But for those looking to do something with a park ranger or a naturalist, we do have some wonderful programming. We have a great working relationship with our official nonprofit partner, the Wild Rivers Conservancy, and we do joint programming with them, and just some really fantastic stuff going on. As mentioned earlier, it depends a lot on when you're here. You get different programs offered in the winter. For those interested in ice fishing, we're starting planning those for January. But if you're trying to have a warmer experience, we obviously have those as well. So we have all ages, all skill levels under our Explore Wild Rivers program, again, jointly done with the Wild Rivers Conservancy. And we also have some fantastic K through 12 educational programs for the youngsters through our Rivers Are Alive programming. Between those, really reaching out and connecting with folks on the rivers, but also throughout the entire watershed and even online. So if you are on the other side of the country and you want to learn about this amazing riverway, we can help you get there. So that's the Wild Rivers Conservancy, and that's where you'd find really a schedule of all the stuff we have going on is on their website.
Okay, that's great. That's Nate Toering. He's the Director of Communications and Education for the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Nate, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm definitely going to bump up St. Croix a few steps on my to-do list.
Thank you so much for having me, Kurt. Appreciate your interest in St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, and look forward to you and your audience visiting this amazing national park.
We'll push you over 1 million.
Sounds like a plan.
That's our show for this week. We hope you found it interesting and planted an idea in your mind for visiting St. Croix National Scenic Riverway. Next week, we're going to take a walk in the park with author Kevin Fedarko, who recounts his efforts to walk through Grand Canyon National Park. Kevin, by the way, is the author of the New York Times bestseller The Emerald Mile, which told the story of 3 river runners who tried to set the record for quickest float trip through Grand Canyon. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Rebenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, These musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.